He is regarded as the greatest villain to have ever existed. He's the one who secretly controls the Empress of the Ming Empire, manipulating the politics and the empire itself according to his own will. Ladies and gentlemen, meet our protagonist, Celso. Hello, everyone, ready to dive into this new story with me? Let's get started, and don't forget to like and leave a comment. Let's go. This is Celso. Through his efforts, he managed to turn the insignificant third princess into an empress. Because of this, people say he has the power to make birds fall from the sky. But there's one thing he cannot do. Yes, that's right. He can't engage in any romance. Why? Because he's a eunuch. Well, for those who don't know, a eunuch is, how can I explain this? You know the bird? Yes, the bird. A eunuch's bird is sad, downcast, and in deep despair. It can't fly high in the skies or feel joy. The poor guy can't even play with his own bird because it's never happy. His bird isn't even sociable with other birds. Wait, you get the idea. Story over. And because of this unfortunate reality, Celso is now in the middle of performing a reincarnation ritual. Suddenly, the Empress of the Empire, Letitia, arrives. She begs Celso to stop the ritual, kneeling beside him and offering him anything he desires. Wealth, power, anything. But Celso calmly tells her that he has already made his decision. He apologizes for not being able to serve her any longer. But deep down, Celso is furious. The man has been a virgin for over 50 years. Why? Because in his past life, he became a victim of Trukuan at the age of 28 and was reincarnated into this Murim world in the body of a 12-year-old boy. However, he was soon captured by a slave trafficker. And not just any trafficker. This was a cruel one who castrated men and sold them as eunuchs. Celso did everything in his power to reclaim his masculinity. He even went as far as turning the third princess into an empress just so he could meet a renowned doctor. He mastered martial arts to the point of achieving rebirth and became incredibly powerful, reaching the highest level a person could attain in martial arts. But neither the doctor nor martial arts could cure him. Nothing worked. And really, what's the point of having wealth and power if you can't enjoy the pleasures of life? That's why he's determined to reincarnate into another body, to experience a life of indulgence, countless wives, and lovers. Meanwhile, Celso is annoyed with the Empress, who's sobbing uncontrollably next to him. He coldly asks her to move aside, but she insists she can't let someone who's practically a father figure to her die in such a meaningless way. Celso scoffs, thinking to himself that even after becoming an empress, she's still as stubborn and childish as ever. Having shared both good and bad times since her childhood, Celso sees the empress as a daughter or a sister. Yet, there were moments he almost gave up on making her empress, especially when her tantrums pushed him to the edge. General, the reincarnation ritual is forbidden. You could die. Die? Yes. Whom? I'd rather die than remain impotent. Let's get this done, my friend. And so, the ritual begins. As the energy flows wildly, Celso contemplates how, if it succeeds, he'll live his life completely differently this time. When he opens his eyes, he hears someone calling him. It seems the ritual worked. A gruff voice asks if he's okay, and as Celso focuses, he recognizes the man, the old slaver who castrated him 50 years ago. In his past life, this man had been killed by bandits before Celso could take his revenge. Could this be, not reincarnation, but regression? He wonders, his heart pounding. Quickly, he checks his body, especially his most important part, and to his relief, it's intact. Young man, are you alright? The slaver asks. You're done for now, Celso replies, masking his excitement. Feigning an injury, Celso says, my wrist hurts. Could you take a look? The old man agrees, saying he has some herbs back home that could help. But the moment the slaver takes Celso's hand, Celso twists the man's fingers painfully. Did I ask for help? Or are you planning to cut me up and sell me as a eunuch again? The old man's eyes widen in shock. How do you know? Before he can finish, Celso wrenches the man's arm behind his back. Despite having regressed, Celso retains all the martial techniques from his past life, the skills of the strongest martial artist alive. In a swift motion, he locks the man in a chokehold. In my previous life, when I heard you'd been killed by bandits, I was devastated, Celso growls, because you were meant to die by my hands. With a final twist, Celso ends the old slaver's life. Standing over the body, Celso spits on it with disgust. This man was the reason my life was a failure. I had power, wealth, everything, and yet I couldn't enjoy a single moment of it. But now, things will be different. Whether it's reincarnation or regression doesn't matter. Celso is determined to live a life of pleasure and indulgence. Sometime later, Celso is seen climbing a snow-covered mountain during the harsh winter. This is the Linking Mountain in Gamsuk province. On the verge of collapse from the cold, he mutters to himself, for the pleasures of life, this suffering is nothing. He briefly fantasizes about using money to visit a bar and indulge with women, but quickly dismisses the idea. I'm not interested in those simple pleasures, he thinks. My precious energy deserves only the highest quality. The man has standards, folks. Yet, his mischievous smirk betrays his thoughts. Only the most beautiful women for me, he whispers. But for that dream to become reality, he'll need wealth and power. As the saying goes, love may be free, but a life of luxury comes at a price. Celso's current goal is to become a hero in the martial world. Before the ritual, he had carefully prepared a hidden cache filled with money, materials, and treasures to support his reincarnated self. Unfortunately, since he regressed rather than reincarnated, that effort was wasted. Not that it matters. For someone like Celso, who once held the prestigious position of head of intelligence for the royal family, regaining wealth and power will be a walk in the park. My first step is to refine my martial arts and take advantage of my knowledge of the future, he muses. Becoming a respected hero won't be so far off. Finally, he arrives at his destination, the peak of the mountain, where the Gongdong sect is located. This will be the starting point for my ambitions, he declares, steeling himself. Inside the sect, a disciple hears someone calling out from outside. Judging by the voice, it's a child. Alarmed, he rushes to the gate, exclaiming, "A child in this weather? That's dangerous." Outside, Celso is shouting fervently, "My parents were killed by bandits. Ever since then, I've dreamed of becoming stronger. Please, let me join the Gongdong sect." Quick explanation: the Gongdong sect is founded on Taoist teachings, blending the martial arts philosophies of Confucianism, Buddhism, and Taoism. To outsiders, it might easily be mistaken for a demonic sect due to its unorthodox practices. The man inside the sect leaps out in front of Celso, observing him carefully. "Climbing the linking mountain alone in this freezing weather is no different than courting death," he remarks. Celso responds with unwavering resolve. "If it means I can join the sect, it doesn't matter." The man studies Celso for a moment, then asks, "Show me your arms and hands." He places his fingers on Celso's wrist, sensing a faint but distinct flow of energy. To his surprise, it's natural energy, steadily circulating and purging impurities. That explains how Celso managed to scale the mountain. The man explains, "This is the connection technique, a foundational method for cultivating energy and strengthening the dantian. You must have incredible talent to ascend this mountain using such a method. Did you learn this from your family?" Celso nods affirmatively. "Yes, my parents taught me." He introduces himself as Jean, the leader of the Gongdong sect. Jean explains that, normally, a series of processes are required to accept someone into the sect. However, since Celso appears to have talent, he will allow him to join directly. Jean then turns and instructs Celso to follow him. The first step is a success. After all, the sect is on the brink of collapse, so they have no reason to reject new disciples. Despite this, Celso reminds himself not to relax. He resolves to continue training diligently, and during his free time, he plans to maintain his physical vigor with Kegel exercises. Yes, I looked it up. It's an exercise involving pelvic muscles, and the pronunciation is Kegel. Celso notes that there are barely any intact buildings left. Once the leading sect among the 9 great sects, the Gongdong sect suffered a significant blow 50 years ago during the War of the Hidden Martial Arts. Jean turns to Celso and says, "Before I explain the rules, there's someone I want you to meet. She'll be your superior and is also the sect's current chief disciple." Celso's mind immediately races. The sect only has one disciple? Perfect. The more chaotic its state, the better for me. A struggling sect means fewer competitors, and Celso can climb to a place of honor more easily, just like Jimmy from his past life, who was revered as the Sword Saint. Jean then shouts, "Jimmy, from today onward, Celso will be your fellow disciple." Suddenly, a strong gust of wind carries a flurry of snow, and a figure emerges before them. It's Jimmy. But hold on a second. Didn't Jean say Celso was about to meet a female disciple? And this person looks very much like a woman. Celso freezes, his eyes widening in recognition. Wait a minute. This Jimmy looks way too familiar, he thinks, startled. He's stunningly beautiful. In his previous life, Celso remembers that Jimmy was known for his extraordinary martial talent, but his appearance wasn't noteworthy. He always wore a triangular hat that concealed most of his features. Now, Celso finally understands why women fought over Jimmy in the past. Jimmy tilts his head slightly, looking concerned. "You don't seem well. Are you feeling sick?" Caught off guard, Celso stammers, "And no, I'm fine." Jimmy smiles kindly. "That's a relief. From now on, let's get along as brothers." Celso, however, can't stop himself from overthinking. How is this possible? He's handsome, kind, and clearly talented. Surely he has some flaw. Maybe his little buddy is only 3 centimeters because having everything is just unfair. Jimmy then grabs Celso's hand, saying enthusiastically, "Come on, there are some places I'd like to show you." As Celso follows reluctantly, his thoughts are in chaos. Man, why is this guy so ridiculously beautiful? Jimmy dashes off, pulling Celso by the hand. Celso immediately grimaces, thinking, I really don't want this guy touching me. He jerks his hand away, calling out, hey, stop. Jimmy freezes, startled, and looks back apologetically. I'm sorry, this is my first time having a disciple, and I got a little too excited. Realizing he might have overreacted, Celso quickly apologizes. No, it's fine. I went overboard. As he speaks, Celso reflects internally, I can't act like this. Building a good relationship with Jimmy could be critical in the future. The scene shifts to Jean, standing alone and seemingly talking to himself. The harsh winter in the Gongdong sect may finally be coming to an end, he murmurs, staring off into the snowy horizon. I truly hope Celso and Jimmy become good friends. Jean's gaze softens, and his thoughts drift back. It was around the same time, 10 years ago, he recalls, when I took in Jimmy. At the time, Jimmy was an organ without a parent? Wait, an orphan without parents. Yes, that's what Jean meant. Once Jean discovered Jimmy's brilliance, he began training and caring for him diligently. Today, Jimmy is the sole beacon of hope for the Gongdong sect's revival. However, Jimmy's journey won't be easy. She'll need to constantly fight against men. Through her interactions with Celso, she'll learn to protect her secret and avoid revealing that she's a woman. See what I mean? You might say, did you really think a guy could be that handsome and kind? That only happens in Hollywood movies. Meanwhile, Celso lies sprawled out on his bed, staring at the ceiling. Tomorrow marks his first day as an official disciple of the sect. But poor Celso can't sleep. And it's all thanks to Jimmy. Or should I say her? Let's rewind about 12 hours. Celso, full of enthusiasm, had said, I'm really looking forward to training with you, Jimmy. Note, I'll switch between he and she based on the perspective of the characters and how they perceived Jimmy at the time. So, pay close attention. Jimmy apologized again. I'm sorry for startling you so much earlier. Even though the sect is crumbling, I still wanted to show you around and introduce you to this place. Jean continues to tell Celso that despite the massacre 50 years ago, the palace where the sect's leader resided and the hall where the disciples trained are still standing. The Gongdong sect, though scarred, has not perished. Celso silently listens, understanding Jimmy's desire to share the history of this place. He reflects on the events from half a century ago, the start of the hidden martial arts war. It all began with the destruction of the Gongdong sect, the strongest sect at the time. Nobody suspected that the demonic sect, rather than attacking the other sects, would target Gongdong first. Celso, though, hesitates and tells Jimmy not to get too close, explaining that he's a shy person. Jimmy, looking a bit down, reassures him that he won't act that way again. But Celso, realizing that distancing himself further wouldn't help, walks over to Jimmy and says, if you want to tell the story of this place, I'd love to hear it. Jimmy, clearly delighted, beams with joy at Celso's words. Celso, with a slight grin, thinks, so far, so good. Calming a friend down is easy. Just tell them what they want to hear. But then, unexpectedly, Jimmy hugs Celso again. Celso freezes, inwardly screaming, what the hell? In the present, Celso can't help but think about Jimmy. In his past life, Jimmy was one of the greatest geniuses to ever live. He helped rebuild the Gongdong sect, and despite all the women throwing themselves at him, he didn't care. Celso reflects on how Jimmy has everything: looks, personality, and ability. Yet he treats women as if they are nothing. Now that Celso has met him, he realizes why Jimmy is gay. Celso is conflicted and anxious. His Jubilee, let's just say, his feelings down south, is reacting to Jimmy, and it's not exactly a comfortable situation. Meanwhile, Jimmy, too, is thinking about Celso. She wonders why she feels this way, especially after being rude to him twice. She recalls Celso's words about wanting to hear the story of Gongdong, how even though he was scared, he still took her feelings into account. Jimmy thinks about how she wants to be closer to Celso, to embrace him freely. The next morning, Celso is up early, cleaning the kitchen. He notes that the state of the kitchen is so bad it might collapse at any moment. He thinks to himself that it's a hassle, but it's something he has to deal with. Even though he finds it all annoying, he's determined to make the most of his time here. After all, he's here to become a hero in the martial world, and he's willing to use every second, yes, even scrubbing a single grain of rice, to make it worthwhile. Celso begins doing Kegel exercises, thinking to himself that he needs to maintain his stamina. Suddenly, Jimmy appears, asking why Celso is in the kitchen so early. Celso feels embarrassed, thinking that Jimmy might have seen him doing the exercises. Jimmy then asks if Celso prepared the entire breakfast by himself. Celso responds that he did, as the younger disciple should take care of such things. Jimmy comments on how fast and competent Celso is. Celso wonders why in the world Jimmy is so handsome. He mentions that after losing his parents, he was forced to grow up quickly due to the hardships, and apologizes if doing everything on his own made Jimmy uncomfortable. Jimmy apologizes as well, explaining that he is also an orphan and finds Celso's maturity impressive. Celso wonders why Jimmy is always apologizing. Is he trying to be a suck-up? Jimmy says he will help now, as he has experience with preparing vegetables, and it wouldn't be fair to let the younger disciple suffer unnecessarily. Celso thinks to himself that Jimmy is indeed caring toward his fellow sect members. After all, the legendary Jimmy from his past life had a sister, a beauty known as the most beautiful in the world, but she probably won't show up for a long time. For now, Celso is Jimmy's only sibling, so he decides to let things unfold naturally. He says he'll grab some fresh water to wash the vegetables. As he goes to get the water, Celso thinks that he doesn't really want to get closer to Jimmy. What he wants is to be the only name that will become famous in the distant future. He plans to seduce all the women who might be charmed by his name and make them fall completely in love with him. Suddenly, the cupboard breaks, and a heavy iron pot falls. Celso jumps back to avoid being hit, but when he realizes what's happened, he sees Jimmy holding him by the waist and asking if he's okay, commenting that Celso is too light. Celso stays silent, thinking that Jimmy smells like wildflowers. But wait a second, what is that hand doing there? Celso freaks out, asking what Jimmy was trying to do. Jimmy tries to explain that he wasn't trying to do anything to him. Celso replies, saying that Jimmy is even blushing. So how can he claim to not be trying anything? For those who know that Jimmy is actually a woman, it's almost painful to watch. Poor Jimmy is embarrassed and asks Celso to rest while she makes the food. Celso is furious but knows he can't scream or act rudely toward a superior disciple. If Jean saw this, he'd definitely be angry with Celso. Poor Jimmy. Celso says that there's no need for her to do these basic tasks. From now on, as the younger disciple of the sect, he will take care of all these chores. Jimmy agrees but insists that it wouldn't hurt to help a little bit. Celso, in turn, wonders why this guy, and so, 2 months pass. In the main courtyard, Jean asks Celso what he thinks the true strength of martial arts is. Some people say it's all about internal energy, consuming all kinds of elixirs. Others believe physical strength is the true power and train their fists constantly. But the real strength comes from a balance between internal and external power, neither too much nor too little. Only then can martial arts truly reach their potential. In other words, shortcuts should never be taken during training. Jean tells Celso that he's going to check on Jimmy and advises him not to slack off in training. Celso thinks to himself that he definitely won't slack off. A superior body means superior energy. What's the point of a weakling having a huge chest if they can't back it up? If it's for the mucha popa technique, all this difficulty will turn into an easy feat. Celso thinks that these 2 months of training seem to be showing results. In the past, when he was a eunuch, no matter how much he trained his body, he could never change his almost feminine, neutral appearance. All of this was because of the damned eunuch martial art he had mastered, following the prescription of a quack doctor. The more he thinks about his past life, the angrier he gets. Then, Jimmy arrives, calling out to Celso, saying that Jean finished the training for the day and came to pick him up. That's when Celso realizes it's already almost night, but it's still not enough. He wants to achieve the body of a seductive warrior as quickly as possible. Later that night, behind the sex mountain, Celso goes there. Every night, he does cardio to build his stamina, but the only thing he's worried about is Jean discovering that he's sneaking out to train. Jean had organized the training schedule to prevent Celso's body from getting injured, and if he found out, he would definitely forbid it. Celso tells himself that he can't settle for regular training or he won't be able to become the king of stamina. Meanwhile, Jimmy is secretly watching. Celso notices him and watches as Jimmy stumbles and rolls on the ground. He asks why Jimmy is there. Jimmy explains that he's been noticing Celso sneaking out every night and became curious. Now he sees that Celso is doing extra training. Jean had warned that pushing the body to its limits is dangerous, and now that he knows this, he can't just stand by and watch Celso keep doing it. Celso thinks to himself that if he had at least 1 year of internal energy training, he would have sensed Jimmy's presence through the chi. He's returned with memories and knowledge, but his body is that of a weak, untrained boy. If he keeps things as they are, Jimmy will definitely tell Jean, and if Celso can't train his stamina, his blood flow will decrease, which means less energy in that area. So Celso apologizes to Jimmy for worrying him and says he has his reasons for doing extra training. He tells Jimmy that he's different from him, a genius who absorbs concepts after just one lesson, while he's just a fool who forgets everything taught to him. But even so, he hates being left behind. He also despises the idea of being kicked out and forced to roam the streets. Celso then dramatically says that he also hates the reality of not even being able to reach Jimmy's level, let alone be by his side. Man, this protagonist is so fake. The scene shows Jimmy conflicting emotions. He thinks that Jimmy is perfect in every way, but he can't bring himself to tell Jean the truth after hearing his heartfelt words. Celso stands there, feeling desperate, not wanting to be kicked out. Jimmy hugs him tightly and apologizes, saying he didn't realize Celso was suffering so much. Celso, overwhelmed, starts to cry for real now. This is his first genuine embrace, and it wasn't with the person he had reserved it for, a woman he imagined in his mind for the last 50 years of his life. But as he feels something soft in the embrace, he wonders what it is. The scene shifts to Jimmy's childhood, where she was judged and called a monster. A man, who is revealed to be Jean, appears and tells her that she doesn't need to listen to hurtful words. He reassures her that she is just another human being, and that anything she lacks can be learned. It is at this moment that Jean invited her to join him. Back to the present, Jimmy tells Celso that Jean would never expel him. Once he became a disciple, he became part of the family. Jimmy assures Celso that he can always count on him, repeating Jean's words, "Anything you lack can be learned." These words hit Celso hard, and he feels guilty for deceiving Jimmy, now sympathizing with him. Celso understands that he has a condition called gynecomastia, a disorder in men that causes uncontrolled breast tissue growth. In his past life, due to being castrated at a young age, Celso also suffered from gynecomastia. As he feels Jimmy's soft chest, he wonders if she has the same condition. The next day in the main courtyard, Jean announces that Celso's physical training is complete. He will now reduce the physical training and focus on internal martial arts. Jimmy congratulates Celso, but his expression shows that he doesn't quite like the change. Celso finds Jimmy annoying, even when he insists on helping with breakfast, despite not needing any help. Jean notices Celso's strange expression and asks if he's feeling well. Celso replies that he's fine, but doesn't want to reduce his physical training. Jean looks at him with a skeptical expression and explains that most people who begin learning the internal arts only train physically enough to maintain balanced physical condition. The rest of their focus is on cultivating internal energy, sword handling, and foot positioning. But for Celso, physical training is the only way to develop a superior physique that will captivate women. He's unwilling to give that up. Jean asks why Celso doesn't want to reduce his physical training. Celso explains that, unlike his talent would suggest, he is actually a bit slow when it comes to learning. To assist his superiors and contribute to the reconstruction of the sect, he needs to put in more effort than others. He then asks Jean, respectfully, to allow him to continue his physical training. Jean, observing Celso's expression, thinks to himself that this is genuine determination. Does Celso really want to rebuild the Gongdong sect so badly? This kind of determination is impressive. Jean wonders if Celso has already understood that his talent is no greater than that of an ordinary person, and that he wants to make up for it with hard work. Jean looks at him for a moment, then hands him a scroll, saying it contains the formula for the foundation of internal martial arts. Celso takes it, unsure whether Jean has given him permission to continue his physical training or not. Jean explains that this world is difficult for those without talent, but for those who dare to challenge it, all paths will be opened. In that case, he permits Celso to continue his physical training. Later, Jean begins the process of inserting energy into Celso's body to help him unlock his chi. He says he will manage and guide the energy, but Celso must remember the path clearly. Celso thinks that this sensation is unlike anything he's felt in his previous life. It's not a sharp cold but a gentle warmth that envelopes his entire body. He feels the warmth of the energy flow through his veins, and then he understands, this sensation is Qi Yang. Jean congratulates him for entering the realm of internal energy. Celso realizes that he has truly entered this realm, that he is no longer a eunuch. Overcome with emotion, he collapses to the ground in joy. Later that night, Jimmy talks with Jean, expressing her desire to continue with physical training. She says she wants to be the future of the sect. Jean realizes it's because of Celso and tells her that she has learned to be a leader. He encourages her to do whatever she wants, reminding her that everything she experiences can be a lesson. Later, alone, Jean reflects on Celso and Jimmy. He thinks that both are young but are so sincere about the reconstruction of the sect. Now, he can finally fulfill the wishes of his ancestors. As this happens, behind the mountains, there are animal carcasses scattered around. A giant serpent was heading toward the Gongdong sect, with its first target being a village nearby. An old man, in despair, looked at his completely destroyed barn and lamented the loss of his entire herd of goats. Every single one was gone, and he collapsed, devastated, as those goats had been nearly everything he owned. The old man was so affected he fell ill, explaining that he had planned to sell the goats and donate part of the money to the Gongdong sect, his one dream being to help the sect recover. And now, in just a few seconds, that dream had been shattered. His grandson, frustrated, spoke up, saying that it made no sense to donate money to a sect that was in such a weakened state, then stormed off angrily. His mother scolded him for being so disrespectful. The old man, however, calmed her, saying not to be upset with the boy, as he was simply confused. He explained that the young man didn't understand what the Gongdong sect had been like before the war, a truly incredible place, a place that had planted dreams and hope in the heart of someone poor like him. But after the invasion by the demonic sect, all the teachings of the Gongdong sect were forgotten. The once beautiful Gongdong sect might never return to its former glory. Meanwhile, back at the Gongdong sect, Celso was training. He noted that he could finally feel it. The yang energy had successfully settled into his core. However, something still felt off every time he tried to use the lesser yang heart technique. He wondered if it could be due to his mastery of yin-based techniques in his previous life, which might now be clashing with the yang technique. Here, we get a brief explanation. The emblem of the Gongdong sect is the reverse taiji symbol, representing the teachings of the ancestors on the inversion of yin and yang. The inversion of yin and yang signifies water flowing to the heavens and fire burning below. In other words, this represents the perfect balance between yin and yang, reaching the highest form of life. Because it goes against the natural order, those without knowledge often mistake the Gongdong sect's techniques for demonic arts. However, the true purpose of the Gongdong sect is to eradicate the demonic sect. Celso realizes he made the right choice in joining Gongdong. Using martial arts to defeat demons is the art of a true man. Suddenly, they hear someone knocking at the gate, or what's left of it. A young boy is there, pleading for help, saying that if this really is the greatest and most just sect, they can't abandon his grandfather, a man who supported the sect all his life despite being poor. Jimmy asks Celso if he hears someone calling, and Celso responds that someone is indeed asking for help, which is unfortunate timing, as Jean is currently away. Jimmy suggests they should go see what's happening. They step outside to check, and the boy explains what happened, pleading for help in catching whoever stole their goats. Celso points out that it's typically best and more appropriate to notify local authorities about thefts. The boy agrees but insists that this didn't seem like something a normal person would do, even if it were a thief who would break down a barn like that. He emphasizes that his grandfather raised those goats specifically to help a little with the sect's reconstruction. The boy, visibly shaken, knows that asking for help without being able to pay is shameful and humbly asks if they couldn't at least help his grandfather, who supported the sect all his life. Celso thinks for a moment, then acknowledges the boy's effort in coming all this way and says they should at least go check out what happened. They head to the site, and the boy points, saying, "This destroyed area is the barn." Celso notes that the barn is located at the base of the mountain connected to the sect, which would make animal attacks more likely. But then he notices something unusual. Tracks on the ground that look like they were made by a snake. Judging by their size, he thinks it could be a demonic snake. Celso asks Jimmy if there are any legends or reports of a giant snake appearing on this mountain. Jimmy says he's never heard of anything like that, and if a dangerous demonic creature lived on the mountain, Jean would have dealt with it by now. Celso considers that if such a large creature existed, there would certainly be a legend about it. This likely means a regular snake mutated due to something in the area. This also means that, if he manages to hunt down and eat this snake, he could absorb a significant amount of vital energy. Celso tells Jimmy they should take care of this. Jimmy hesitates, asking if it's really a good idea to go ahead without informing Jean. Celso replies that it might be nothing and that causing unnecessary alarm would be unwise. Besides, refusing to help the boy and his grandfather would be wrong. If they ignore the plea of this loyal supporter, the rumors that the sect is demonic might only worsen. Jimmy is convinced by Celso's reasoning, acknowledging that, if a demonic creature truly is on the loose, it could endanger more people. The boy's face lights up with relief and gratitude. He's clearly someone who will grow up to be a respectable man. Celso observes that the barn was destroyed in a very forceful manner, meaning there must be clear tracks from the snake nearby. A bit later, he calls Jimmy over, announcing that he has found the snake's trail, which should lead them right to it. Now that they have a lead, Celso insists they should move quickly and follow it. They spend quite some time tracking the path. Jimmy again hesitantly asks if it's really wise to act without consulting Jean, but Celso counters with a psychological push, reminding him of their duty to help the vulnerable villagers who rely on them. He advises that, for now, they should just focus on following the trail carefully so they don't lose it. However, after some time, Celso stops abruptly. The snake's tracks have disappeared. Jimmy shouts a warning, and Celso glances up just as the snake strikes, wrapping him in a crushing coil. Jimmy calls out to Celso in desperation. As he struggles, Celso recalls a significant moment from his past life. Before Jimmy left to join the martial world, he once got lost in this mountain range and accidentally stumbled upon a hidden relic from the Sun Worship Society. In that place, he rediscovered a trove of Gongdong sect teachings that had been lost to time, stored in a chest left by ancient ancestors. Among these was a powerful elixir that Jimmy had consumed. For an ordinary animal to transform into a demonic creature, it would need to absorb an enormous amount of spiritual energy. This snake must have passed by the location of the elixir, drawing in its power. In other words, if he survives this encounter, Celso won't just gain strength, he might even reclaim the sect's lost secret techniques. I have to give it to this protagonist. He takes a bite to the stomach from a giant snake, and his first thought is how to get stronger. Jimmy rushes over, trying to help Celso, who's doing his best not to become snake food. Jimmy is amazed that, even while poisoned, Celso is still fighting. He tries to cut the snake with his sword, but the blade barely scratches its scales. Before he knows it, the snake's tail whips around with immense force, hitting him hard. Celso, watching, thinks Jimmy is being a bit too reckless. Grabbing a nearby piece of wood, he jabs it into the snake's eye. The snake recoils in pain, and Celso uses this chance to put some distance between them, though his arm is injured in the process. Jimmy asks if Celso is okay, but Celso just comments on how tough the snake's body is, making it hard to penetrate with a sword. Jimmy agrees, saying the only way to kill it is by going for the head, but the problem is keeping up with its speed. Celso, barely holding on through the poison, realizes he's able to withstand it longer than most because of his skills from his previous life. But if Jimmy gets poisoned too, he'll certainly die. In that case, Celso knows he has to create an opening for Jimmy. He tells Jimmy to wait for his signal and, when the time comes, to use the minor yang technique to maximize his sword's destructive power. Jimmy, concerned, asks how Celso plans to do this in his weakened state, but Celso doesn't respond. Instead, he charges straight at the snake. The snake lunges at him, and he narrowly dodges, wrapping a cloth around the snake's head and pulling it tightly to restrict its movements. Jimmy seizes the moment, rushing forward with a fierce determination. With one powerful stroke, he slices through the snake's neck as if it were butter. In disbelief at how easy it felt, Jimmy wonders if Celso anticipated this, creating the perfect chance to strike. Then, remembering Celso, he finds him collapsed on the ground. Celso, fighting to stay conscious, reflects that a demonic snake's venom carries a powerful yang energy. This actually works in Celso's favor, though. Since he mastered superior energy control in his previous life, he's able to expel only the venom, keeping the yang energy for himself. This guy finds any chance to get stronger, efficient indeed. Meanwhile, Jimmy is panicking, thinking Celso might die. Poor thing. She blames herself, saying it's all her fault, and is desperate to save him. She lays him down and begins to suck the venom out, telling herself she's not ready to lose him. It's a touching moment, until Celso wakes up to see Jimmy sucking on his neck. He starts to freak out, but Jimmy assumes the venom has paralyzed his tongue. He tries to scold her, but he can't manage any words, and she just reassures him that everything's fine. Later, Celso is absolutely drained, not from the venom, though, but from Jimmy, of all things. He sets the snake on the fire, making a hearty roast. Jimmy, watching, comments that she's never seen anyone eat a demonic creature before. This is something new. Celso explains that it depends on the creature. For a snake, if cooked thoroughly, it becomes nourishing for the body. Jimmy says Jean would have loved to eat this too, and Celso starts to notice she brings up Jean a lot. Sometime later, after hours of following the snake's trail, they reach the final mark, which leads them to a cave. Jimmy senses a strong spiritual energy coming from inside. Celso realizes Jimmy has excellent intuition, and as they enter, she remarks that she never imagined a place like this would be on the mountain. She then wonders if this could be the secret society of sun worship. Celso explains to Jimmy that if they are truly in the sacred location of the sun-worshipping sect, this is where the ancient masters of the Gongdong sect cultivated their Tao. He mentions the legend that, 300 years ago, the sword master Honeyuan achieved immortality in this very cave, meaning that the place is likely filled with elixirs. This would be perfect for Celso to recover his stamina. Jimmy spots a box containing some pills and rushes to grab them. Celso comments that the snake must have consumed these pills to transform into a demonic creature. They continue to explore the cave until they come across an ancient stone house, where they find books on a table. Jimmy examines one of the books and realizes that these are the lost techniques of the Gongdong sect, confirming that this could indeed be the sun-worshipping sect's secret location. As Jimmy becomes engrossed in the discovery, Celso takes the opportunity to search elsewhere. With a clear objective in mind, he hurries to find the elixirs before Jimmy does. After a short while, he discovers a room with a floating pill, and his expression reveals his determination. He thinks to himself that consuming this pill will bring him one step closer to realizing his dream, and his goal of building a harem kingdom. However, as he reaches out to take the pill, his hand suddenly freezes, halting his action. The scene then shifts to Jimmy, who finds himself in a room resembling a bathhouse, with an entrance marked by ancient carving. Suddenly, he hears a loud noise and rushes back to check on Celso, worried for his safety. Upon finding Celso, he notices that the area where the pill had been is now encased in ice. Jimmy quickly recognizes what the floating object is, the legendary elixir of sacred water. Celso is fuming, realizing that the elixir of sacred water is formed over 1,000 years, and its energy is overwhelmingly making it incredibly dangerous for anyone to consume. Jimmy asks if Celso is alright, visibly alarmed, thinking something terrible has happened. Celso, irritated, reflects that, indeed, something terrible has happened to him. The elixir contains so much yin energy that if too much of it accumulates in a man's body, it can begin to alter his form to resemble that of a woman, which is exactly what happened to him in his past life. If he consumes the elixir, all the strength and stamina he's worked to build will be undone. Meanwhile, Jimmy is confused, not understanding why Celso is so upset. Celso explains that the elixir of sacred water is legendary. Its potency can awaken a person's vital energy and their meridians. He says that Jimmy, not him, should take the elixir. Jimmy refuses, insisting that it wouldn't be fair since Celso found it first. In his mind, Celso is furious, calling the elixir useless for him. But on the outside, he maintains his calm, playing the good guy. He explains that it would be a waste for him to consume the elixir since Jimmy develops faster. For efficiency's sake, it makes more sense for Jimmy to take it, as he's the most suited to restore the sect. After thinking it over, Jimmy suggests that Celso should take it instead because of his slower development. With the elixir, Celso could stay by Jimmy's side longer. At this point, Celso is hit by his own words. Nevertheless, he insists that Jimmy should take the elixir. He gently takes Jimmy's hand, urging him to accept it as a token of his respect and care for his well. Now, knowing the truth that Jimmy is actually a woman who has never experienced romance, this situation becomes incredibly awkward for her. She hesitates, stammering slightly, before finally agreeing to take the elixir. Celso explains that the elixir is imbued with yin energy, so Jimmy must use internal energy that aligns with the yin element. He then asks if there was anything in the lost techniques they found that addressed yin energy. Jimmy confirms that there were indeed the 3 true techniques of yin, so she begins to read and memorize them. It's almost too fast. She just scans the page and flips to the next. Celso is astonished by this, thinking to himself that Jimmy is truly a genius. At this rate, she'll be able to absorb the elixir's power with minimal effort. After memorizing all the techniques, Jimmy stands up, walks to the elixir, and swallows it. Almost immediately, she feels the effect, her body begins to react, and she doubles over in pain, gasping as she says her heart feels like it's freezing. Celso asks if she's alright, but before he can get an answer, Jimmy collapses onto the ground. The energy inside her body has spiraled out of control, and if she doesn't do something, it could kill her. Suddenly, a pressurized air surrounds Jimmy, pushing Celso away. He wonders if the yin energy is too strong for her to control. Jimmy is on the verge of freezing, and we're given a glimpse into her mind as she struggles against the yin energy. She manages to make contact with the energy, and suddenly, the entire scene shifts. She finds herself in a desert, facing a younger version of herself as a child. The child is killing a crow, declaring that it had killed a family of sparrows and must therefore die as well. The scene shifts, and the child turns to face Jimmy, asking why people call them monsters and then charges at her. Back in the physical world, Celso watches as Jimmy nearly freezes, knowing exactly what's happening. He realizes that the demon within her is attacking her mental weak points. However, he never imagined that Jimmy harbored a demon inside her. Celso decides to help Jimmy by channeling energy into her body. He focuses, trying to find the right spot, and begins directing the energy. He urges her to control herself. Inside Jimmy's mind, she's struggling against the demon. She hears Celso's voice telling her to take control of the elixir. He advises her to use the 3 true yin techniques and direct the energy from the elixir through her meridians. He shouts that if Jimmy doesn't focus, she will fall into a demonic deviation. Inside, Jimmy is taking a beating from the demon, but Celso continues, saying that this yin energy is incredibly powerful. If it weren't for Jimmy, her body would already be cold and lifeless. He thinks to himself that he can't let Jimmy die. She's crucial for achieving his own goals. He tells her that, in his past life, he reached the level of an absolute master. Jimmy should consider herself lucky to have him there with her. Meanwhile, inside her mind, the demon asks why people call them monsters. Jimmy manages to grab a stone and hurls it at the demon, hitting it square in the face. As she runs, she reflects on the demon, explaining that it's the price of the power she's had since birth. It's the nature that's always lurking, waiting to consume her weaker self. The demon lands a punch, which she manages to block, but it sends her crashing into a rock. She wonders if she's really going to be devoured this way by her own inner demon. But then she hears Celso's voice again, telling her not to give up. Her body fills with energy as she starts to focus. She says she can feel Celso's energy flowing through her. On the outside, Celso encourages her to concentrate, warning her not to stop the flow of energy. His own hand is starting to become severely damaged by the strain, but he tells Jimmy not to be tricked by the demon. The key is to absorb the elixir's energy. He then tells Jimmy that he's going to help her relax her meridians. which might be painful but will ultimately assist her in controlling the energy. He thinks that outside, the yin energy is likely still out of control, but Celso is enduring it to help her. The demon charges again, but this time, Jimmy doesn't stand still. She propels herself forward, hitting the demon with a powerful punch that sends it flying like a ping pong ball. She starts spitting out ketchup, thinking that first, she needs to absorb the essence of the elixir to fill up her internal energy and then try to defeat the demon. So now, the process seems simple, just fill up her internal energy, and on the outside, Celso will help by injecting energy. But it's not going to be that easy. The demon isn't just going to sit back and watch, it comes after Jimmy. On the outside, Celso finds the right point and manages to immobilize the demon. Meanwhile, Jimmy is totally focused, honing in on every energy point in her body. Outside, Celso is helping, giving her instructions on which meridian paths to follow. The demon manages to break free and comes after her again, but then, out of nowhere, it stops. Jimmy is in total focus, and the demon is pressed hard against the ground, slowly being swallowed by the earth, until it completely dissolves into internal energy. On the outside, the energy calms down too. Celso says that everything points to Jimmy successfully absorbing the yin energy from the elixir. Then he tells her the next step. She has to send the yin energy to the filtration point, as the meridian opening is almost complete. Inside, Jimmy is thinking about how Celso has been like this from the start, always putting her first, dedicating himself to making her stronger, and giving her all the important stuff. She realizes that Celso has become really important to her. She's happy to have met him, and if she can, she'll pay him back for his kindness. No matter how the world turns against them, she'll always stand by his side. Outside, Celso says that Jimmy is completely stable. He stands up, saying it was really tough. But the most important thing is, isn't there another elixir lying around somewhere? The only one he found had to be the sacred water one. In his past life, because he focused on yin energy, he used to push women away like they were pests. Then he notices some moss stuck to the rock where the sacred water elixir used to be. He wonders how moss could live there despite all the yin energy accumulating in that spot. He feels a yang energy coming from the moss. He says it's a hongi herb, one level below sacred water, but still an amazing herb. Then he stops, thinks for a second, and realizes what he's saying. There's a hongi herb right there. He jumps up, super excited, like a kid. Well, technically, he is kind of a kid, but he doesn't waste any time. He grabs the herb and sends it straight in, starting to cultivate it to absorb the yang energy. Normally, it's common to gather the essence of the elixir in the lower dantian and turn it into internal energy, but he decides to spread the energy of the herb throughout his entire body to absorb it. As the body gets healthier, vitality improves too. He's absorbing the yang energy really well, and he starts sweating like crazy. The herb isn't as strong as sacred water, but now he has a body that won't get sick. He stands up and realizes Jimmy is gone. Celso looks at himself, all sweaty and gross after cultivating, and figures there's probably a bathhouse around here somewhere, so he heads there to clean up. But hold up, my friends, guess who's in the bathhouse right now? Jimmy. She hears Celso calling out, asking if she's taking a bath. Ah, my dear friends, could this be the moment Celso finds out that Jimmy is actually a woman? Let's find out in the next chapter. Comment below if you want the next part, and I'll bring it to you as soon as it's out. Later, fam.